What's going on, everybody? Paddle and Fin has got a meetup going down October 16th through 18th at Eastport Marina and Resort in Alpine, Tennessee, which falls right on Dale Hollow. What we're going to be doing is just hanging out, fishing. Depending on the number of people that show up and the interest, we may do a small tournament. We will have some stuff to give away. Saturday evening, we're going to do a hangout and a little barbecue action. We'll have food for everybody. If you're looking for lodging, you could stay right at the resort. It's $50 per person per night. And what you get is your own personal bedroom on a houseboat, luxury houseboat, courtesy Eastport Marina. That's a special price they gave us to lend to our listeners. If you want more info on the resort, you can go to eastport.info and their website will pop up there. You'll see all the houseboats and things like that. A majority of our hosts are going to be there, and we would love to spend some time on the water with you.
This segment is brought to you by JigMasters Jigs. When in doubt, get the jig out. Go to JigMasters.com and use promo code PNF20 and save 20% off your next jig order today.
Welcome to the Bass Kayak and Beer segment on the Paddle and Fin Network. It's your host Armando Sola, and on this segment we kick back with a special guest and talk about life, kayak fishing, and the pursuit of big bass. So get your cold brews on and enjoy the show. So welcome once again to the Bass Kayak and Beers segment on the Paddle and Fin Network. My special guest for the day is Mr. Luke Johnston. But before we start, I almost forgot, check out Douglas Rods, sponsor for my show, DouglasOutdoors.com, to check the full lineup of rods. Great, amazing rods. They're actually featured now on Tackle Warehouse. So if you want to order online, you can order online on tacklewarehouse.com. So anyways, like I said, I got Luke Johnston. He's from the Great Northwest, from the Northern Oregon area, right, Luke?
Yep, that's right.
Luke, well, thank you very much for joining me to the show. Before I let Luke do an introduction, and I kind of want to give you a little behind the stage kind of thing about how the show came up. And this is going to be, bear with me, because this is going to be, I'm probably going back way more than I need to explain the show. Kind of interesting. So a lot of you know I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, and I'm from that. I was born in the mid-'70s, so that's kind of like what I call that cable TV generation, where even though Puerto Rico is part of the U.S., we all U.S. citizens over there, we really didn't get to see the American pop culture until cable TV got mainstream. So that was, to me, somewhere in the mid-'80s, where my dad got cable TV and I got immersed into the American pop culture. And with it came those Sunday morning outdoor TV shows and that involved bass fishing. And that's where I really fell in love with fishing, even though we couldn't really bass fish in Puerto Rico because nobody did bass fishing back then in Puerto Rico. But I used to love it. My mom would say she would wake up early in the morning on a Sunday. She'd see me with my rods and my tackle box. I was about 7 years old, just sitting and watching Bill dance. Probably, I can't even remember what shows were at that time. But anyways, so I got obsessed, or not obsessed, but I really had a fascination for bass fishing. And you know, a few years ago, I moved here to Texas. And I finally get to do some real bass fishing here in Texas. And I've always been fascinated with bass fishing, like I said. And I know it's, for the most part, it was for a few decades more of a Southern culture, right? But it now has grown, where it has expanded to pretty much everywhere in the U.S. And I've always got an asphyxiation for how California is completely different in the fact that it's geographically just kind of separated. You don't see many great Cali hammers doing that trips down to the Midwest to do bass fishing. But yeah, when all those great anglers from the Midwest go to California to fish, it's hard to even crack the top 10. It's all locals, and it speaks to what great anglers has. So moving to the future, I got a message from my special guest, Luke Johnston, who called me out for not showing love to those great Northwest anglers. And He's completely right. I have been ignoring my northwest anglers way too much. So I extended an olive branch, and I got one of your best northern anglers for bass fishing here in my show, Luke Johnston. So thank you, Luke, for first of all calling me out, which you did, and I have to admit, mea culpa. And again, and thank you for coming on our show, man.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. I didn't, like I said, I didn't mean to call you out, man. I just, dude, it's, like I was saying before, we just, it's almost like bass that don't exist, outside of the, California on the West Coast. And they definitely do. I've been fishing for them now for about 5 years, and yeah, man, they're here, and there's some big ones too, and we've got some really good bass waters. So I'm excited to share some of that.
No, but I'm happy you and when I say call me out, it's actually he would send me a DM message and say, hey, remember us guys over here, show us some love, and it's right. And I haven't traveled to the Great Northwest, that being Portland, and Seattle area. I almost got a job. Actually, that's funny. I almost got a job for what used to be Immigration and Naturalization Service, the INS, to work in Vancouver right before September 11. I used to work at the airport. No, actually, after September 11. I was in charge of security at the airport in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Not in charge, I should say, overseeing the operations, kind of do a quality control. So I got to know a lot of federal agents, and they told me, hey man, they're about to hire a bunch of people at INS. Why don't you come in and interview? And I did, and I took the federal test, which if you ever taken a federal test to become a federal agent, I'm going to pat myself on the back on this one. Those are hard tests, man.
I bet they are.
I thought I flunked, and they told me, they usually call like the top tier on, as far as scores goes, and then they'll trickle down to the ones who got like, in the mid 80s and stuff like that, if they see how positions open. And I found out I got like and again, I'm bragging here, but I got like a 98 or 95, I think it was. So I got called immediately. And I know I'm going on this story. I wasn't expected to go, but there was no local positions there in San Juan. So they were telling me, well, you could go to US, but this says, if you go to Canada, which they're trying to get more people over there, you get paid for housing, and cost of living is more. So I said, yeah, I'll apply to Canada. And then the whole merger with INS and Customs Border Protection and Customs got merged into what is called Homeland Security, and that delayed the whole process so long that I even got a diplomatic passport issued and everything, but I never got the job, and I stayed at my current job. So, anyways, I went off the rails on the episode.
No,
but
you would have been over here.
I would have been over there, man.
Sharing, yeah.
Yeah. So I fell in love with that area over there, Vancouver area. It's beautiful. I think it's great. So, anyways, Luke is here to talk about that. Luke, before we start talking and diving into bass fishing in the Great Northwest, tell us a little bit, backstory about yourself. What got you into fishing? What got you kayak fishing and the bass fishing? Because I know over there you were talking was more like salmon, steelhead trout, and stuff like that. But you actually do more bass fishing. So give us your backstory on that.
Yeah, man, absolutely. So when I was a kid, just like a lot of people, Dad took me out fishing, and I grew up over here. Lived here pretty much my whole life, and it was all trout when I was a kid, because we all the lakes around here are stocked with trout, but the rivers and the streams are packed full of native cutthroat trout, and all you need is like a little spinner, like rooster tail spinners were the go-to. I mean, I've lost and used so many rooster tails, it's just stupid. So yeah, my dad used to take me fishing. We'd catch some nice trout in the rivers. And then I grew up doing that, and in the little town that I grew up in the mountain range that's to the west of here, the Coast Range. So we have the Cascades, which is the big mountains, that everybody knows. Mount St. Helens, for example, was the volcano that exploded, right? No. Mount Hood, so on. And then here, Portland and that area is in the valley. And then there's another mountain range before you get to the coast. And in that Coast Range is where I grew up. And there was a little lake there, go catch some trout all the time. And in the river, I used to just put on like old crappy tennis shoes and shorts and just trek like miles down this river that ran through town, just catching cutthroat trout. And man, yeah, you could catch them like up to, 16 inches in there. Nice trout. And And I got out of that as I got into high school and then into college, and pretty much for probably close to 10 years, I didn't fish at all, really. Life just kind of, got away from me there for a while. And one day it was about, I guess it was about 5 years ago, I think 2016. I just kind of woke up one day and was like, man, I got to go fishing. I don't know. It's just something just was getting at me. So I went and bought a kind of, looking back, was a cheap rod and reel, I think at Cabela's, like a $30-$40 combo. And a couple trout. Yeah. I don't even know. I think it was probably their name brand thing, whatever. And I went out to a lake that's not too far from here, and was just throwing again that same thing I knew from being a kid, that little probably like 1/8 ounce rooster tail, and they had just stocked the lake, right? They must have just stocked it like that weekend or something, and I caught like, I don't know, 12 trout, right, in an afternoon. And it was just like that, that rush, that feeling again of like, oh man, yeah, I remember how this felt when I was a kid, And then from there, there's a lake not too far from here, one of our better lakes. It's all kinds of recreation. It's a reservoir, pretty big lake. It's called Hag Lake, and I knew they had bass in there. And so I was like, man, that'd be cool to catch some bass. And I hadn't bass fished as a kid, really. I had attempted, but never really succeeded. I was like, that'd be cool to catch a bass. So I went up there with literally that same rod and one lure. I had a Texas rigged weightless Senko. And just before that, like a week before that, I was on the internet. How do you rig a Senko? What is a Senko? And taught myself how to rig it. I had no idea what I was doing. Anyway, that first time I went out, I caught one bass. And but I was looking out sort of across the lake, and there was this huge grass flat that I couldn't get to. There was no access. Like, it was down this kind of sheer wall where the opposite road, the road on the opposite side dropped down. And I mean, I guess you could hike down there if you were feeling real ambitious, but I was thinking, how can I get there? I need a boat, right? And then so, I get on the internet, and I was looking at Dick's Sporting Goods, right? Oh man, they got kayaks. They're only $200. Like, and I could get a paddle for $50, and I could get a life jacket, and next thing I know, I'm like, oh, $300 all in, and I can get over to that grass flat, right? And that's all I wanted at the time, Next thing I know, I'm strapping a Pelican. I don't even know what it was. Pelican Trailblazer 100, I think. Sit inside, $200 kayak. I'm strapping it on foam blocks to the top of my Honda Civic. And I had never been in a kayak. I've never been in a bass boat. I had no idea what I was doing. But that was it. That was the impetus. And then, from there, I had that kayak for 2 years. I took that thing everywhere, man. I like going camping, and I'll set up like a 3-day camping trip at some lake, some destination lake, and I'll camp there so that I get, I'll get there early morning on, say, Friday morning or something, and I'll fish 3 solid days at one lake, that I wouldn't drive 3 hours to on a weekend, And so I took that like across the state. I crossed over to the eastern side of the state. I took it down south. I took it like up north. I took it everywhere I could think to go in one summer, and it was crazy. And I was just stuck. I was so hooked on it. And then a couple of years later, I upgraded to my current kayak, and I've been fishing out of that for a few years. But yeah, man, I felt that thing as a kid, and then I felt it again when I was an adult, and it just, I love it now, just do it all the time. It's all I think about.
That's awesome. That's pretty much I thought I was maybe not the only one, but one of the few that had that kind of like same backstory. And as I've done the podcast, I realized there's a lot of us out there. And I was talking to, I think it was, I forgot his first name, from Pond Boys, who were talking about that same thing. I think it was him. We're talking about, once you get into those right before the teens, where you start showing interest in girls. Now it's more of a hormonal decision that you like. Girls really like other stuff other than fishing. They're not really into fishing, so that kind of like takes you away from fishing, and then kind of do a full circle, which is kind of my story, and I guess everybody's story. Now, I didn't grow up in a bass fishing culture, and that's one of the things that I find interesting when you look at all the great tournament anglers. Russ Snyder, who's actually on the Noob segment today on Battle and Fan, and Cody Milton, who I've had on my show. It's different for guys like you and me who don't come from a bass fishing culture.
Right.
Like, we fish, but it's very different go from trout to bass fishing. And for me, it was more like catfish, throwing hooks with worms. And then when I was in freshwater, when I was in saltwater in Puerto Rico, then was, fishing for, whatever I can find on saltwater. So there's a huge learning curve for us that don't come from that, blue collar grassrooted bass fishing culture. And it's interesting how the sport has grown so much, which is not just a southern thing right now. It's more nation, it's ingrained in kind of like American culture and pop culture.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if there's not a state in the country that you couldn't go catch a bass in, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, there's places like that you don't really think about having bass, like maybe the Rocky Mountain states, Colorado, Utah, Idaho, whatever, Montana. But I'm sure there are bass there.
Oh yeah, Catherine Fields.
Just you don't hear about it.
Yeah, Catherine Fields, a great angler. She's from Utah, and she fishes out of bass in Utah. And it's interesting. I can't remember. I don't want to swear by this because I don't remember. I was reading an article on bass fishing and how bass fishing was really just like bass up until not that long ago. I don't want to say the word recently because I don't think that's accurate, but not that long ago, bass was just, the kind of like Alabama, Tennessee area. And then it got introduced to some other areas. Mm-hmm. And I'm assuming a lot of it had to do with, getting the tourists, coming over and all that. So it's very interesting how is it going. And I didn't realize that. I thought bass was just native, United States, but it's actually not. But it is native in the United States, but not everywhere in the United States. Like Great Northwest, bass were introduced there. It's not that they're naturally from there. So that was very interesting to me. But a couple of things that I wanted to touch you and I forgot. How is everybody doing up there? Because I know you guys have a rough go about, with the whole wildfires. Plaguing that area. How's your family? How's the community where you live have been affected by the wildfires?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think, for me, where I live, we're all okay, right? Like, so I live on the west side of the city of Portland, in the suburbs, and nothing happened over here. But man, on the east side, so on the southeast side of the city, it goes from city to rural real quick. And I had a coworker who got evacuated. It was like at a stage 2 evacuation or something. And then so the fires, they really came up close. 2 years ago, we had a fire in the Columbia River, we call it the Gorge. It's basically a big canyon there, but on the Columbia River. And, we woke up, I had ash on my car. Wow. So it definitely happens. And this one was equally as scary because, these fires, they just start coming in toward the city and, populated areas. I mean, Portland, it seems like a small city, but in the metro area here, there's like 2 million people. So if a fire starts out in any of the rural sort of pieces that are just slightly connected and it starts coming in, it's going to affect a lot of people real quick. But really, south of us, man, like down in the central of the state near Eugene, which is our second biggest city, people like in a couple entire little towns got decimated, and then south, down near Medford, literal, dude, I saw pictures like literal just houses were just piles of ash.
Oh.
And so I appreciate you bringing that up. It is rough, man. And my heart goes out to those people for sure. It's a tough, but it's we're dealing with it a lot more recently. It's actually gotten probably worse. Forest fires are nothing new. Lightning strikes and things up in the mountains happen, and then that causes those fires. But it's just that our population's growing. There's more people at risk. Our summers are getting hotter and longer. I mean, it's dang near October. It was 85 degrees today. Luckily we had some rain. The last week it rained a lot, which helped a lot. And the winds died down too, which was a big thing. So, I appreciate you bringing that up. Everybody I know is doing okay, but definitely some people did not fare so well.
Yeah,
So
and our hearts, thoughts and prayers to everybody over there because, bass. We all love bass fishing, kayak fishing, but I mean, life, you know, um, takes a hand, and we have to acknowledge that and, send out our best, take a moment to reflect on that because it's a very unfortunate situation
yeah,
that a lot of you are going through out there. So definitely our thoughts and prayer. Hope, things are now it's looking better and they'll stay that way at least for a while, and people that have been affected can rebuild and move on with their lives. So definitely,
yeah, thank you.
not. It's funny that you mentioned the San Helen volcano. That was my first National Geographic magazine that I've read.
Oh
My
yeah,
first when I subscribed National Geographic, or my mom did for me. I was young. I showed interest in science and all that. That was my first National Geographic. That article that really focused on Sound Helen. But anyways, don't want to get too much out of the subject. So tell us a little bit, Luke, about how do you approach bass fishing? And I'm assuming most of it is smallmouth, and you do have largemouth bass up there
oh yeah, we do. Yeah,
and excuse my ignorance, you do, right?
yep.
So tell us, what's the difference between fishing for smallmouth bass and largemouth bass?
You mean
Up
over
there.
here,
Over there, yeah, of course.
like
Yeah.
the difference between the two? Well, you know what? Let me start with some similarities, and then I'll go
Yeah.
to some differences.
Sure.
Because the thing is, so when I first started bass fishing, I'd watch all these YouTube videos, and I still do, darn near religiously, right? I watch them all the time.
Who's your
And
favorite one, by the way, before you go?
tactical bassin, probably.
Yeah.
And I kind of felt a kinship to them. I still do. I know they left the West Coast, but just because I was like, oh man, these dudes are on the West Coast, they're catching fish. It's a similar environment. I mean, it's
Yeah.
definitely different, but I can get to the Bay Area. They were near the Bay Area, Clear Lake and whatnot. It's probably like a 16-hour haul for me, something.
Yeah.
12 maybe, if I do it in the middle of the night, no traffic. Anyway, so I just felt like a connection, like, oh, they're
Yeah.
near me. They're doing things in a similar way that I probably need to do. So I really latched onto their sort of techniques, because when other videos that I watch, you'll see somebody in, I don't know, say Texas, Tennessee, I don't know, the South Alabama, or wherever they're at, and you just see like they're talking about, oh, we've got 12 inches of visibility, right? And so we need to throw these like big old Colorado blade spinner baits, or we need to just these big old jigs that make a bunch of racket, right? That it doesn't work here for me. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't exist, because so I was just out yesterday on the Columbia River, and this is so normal, at least 10 feet of visibility. I mean that's not even
rare here.
and that's not even clear too, because so there's some lakes down in the Central Valley down near Eugene where 20 feet of visibility is normal, right? Like, I mean, the water is just so clear, and you can see
Wow.
you can just see everything. And so you really have to adapt your presentation to that, because it has to be natural. Like, you're not going to trick them with some big, like, bright red crankbait in June, right? Or July, when that water's had time. There's not a bunch of rainfall. It's had time to settle out, right? It's just clear. It's just sitting there. I mean, yeah, sure, you can catch them on a crankbait like that. Sure, they're gonna bite it probably sometimes, but for me, it's like if it's not white or kind of like a goldish color, or maybe like a green pumpkin,
Bronze.
yeah, like it's got to be some sort of natural. It's got to at least attempt to mimic something that they might see, and they're all crawdads. They're crawfish, crawdads. They're all over in our lakes and stuff too, and they eat that a lot. But it's like, if you're trying to mimic bait fish, especially, it's got to be something super natural, because they're gonna see it from a mile away. So
awesome. So, anyways, I got you out of what you were saying. So, what the similarities between smallmouth bass and largemouth bass? And I do apologize, I kind of interrupted you with that question.
No, it's good. So, the similarities, I think that's a lot of it. Like what I was just saying too, is like it's you've got to be natural with it. And then a lot of the differences, though, are really where we fish for them, because there are a few lakes that have both, and you can
Really?
yeah, oh yeah, so there's some lakes again down in the valley. There's even a big lake here. The lake that has our state record smallmouth fishery, I rarely catch smallmouth at, but I catch largemouth there all the time. But I know there's smallmouth in there. I'm just not usually fishing for them in the same place. Like, so it's this really deep reservoir, and it's like 100 feet deep near the dam. And there's this big rock, like riprap dam, and it's riprap probably down to, you know, all the way to the bottom, right, 100 feet deep. And along that, you can catch smallmouth all day because they like that rocky structure. But on the upper side of the lake, it's all grass flats. That's what I was talking about with my, you know, getting my first kayak earlier. It's all this grassy flat, and the largemouth love that. I've never caught a smallmouth in that area, but I'll catch largemouth there, you know, all the time, any day. So they just inhabit different areas of the lake. And then, you know, in then our rivers. So from what I understand, and I you know, they probably weren't that way since I was a kid, like a young kid, but the Willamette River, which is the main river, it runs through Portland, but it runs all the way from middle of, you know, Central Oregon, all the way up to where it hits the Columbia River. It's a really big river. I think it's like in the top 20 in the nation in terms of flow. And it is packed full of smallmouth. But I hear that, you know, 20, 30 years ago, it had a lot more largemouth. But the smallmouth have taken over just because they're so aggressive. And I do catch a largemouth there, but I'll catch them on accident. But, you know, that river has a little bit of current. It has a lot of rocky structure, you know, that sort of thing. So I think that's the major difference, is just that, like, the smallmouth around here, if you can find the rock, you'll find the smallmouth. And then with the bass, it's like a lot more grassy, or maybe, you know, there's a fallen log, you know, a lay down in the water, something like that. It's more of where you find them, not necessarily what you're using to catch them, I think, at least in my experience.
Yeah. What do you like to do more? Smallmouth bass or largemouth bass?
Yeah. You know, I do smallmouth a lot more often. And I think it's because it's a lot more accessible to me. And man, they fight so hard too. Like, you know, a 20 inch smallmouth, man, is a blast. It really is. I love it. But you know, I like catching largemouth too. Sometimes I'm just up for an adventure, and I'll drive like some of those lakes that are down near the Eugene area and stuff. They're a 2-hour drive for me. But it's different too. It's like if I go down there and I can catch, you know, a few fish or whatever, and I can kind of convince myself, you know, hey man, I can do this. Like, I can go to a new body of water and catch a fish that I'm not used to catching. And those are almost always largemouth. And so I like that a lot too. But mostly smallmouth. I mean, I target smallmouth probably, you know, 80%, something like that.
What would say the realistic size and weight you can expect for largemouth bass in both largemouth bass and smallmouth bass? And I know that's going to differ. But what would be, like, if I'm going to Oregon on the Great Northwest to go fishing? Obviously, I'm from Texas. You know, the expectations to catch a 20 inch double digit, you know, largemouth bass is real. Going into the Northwest, what could somebody expect? An experienced angler can expect to be like, to catch, you know, that would be like, yeah, that sounds about right for that area that you live.
That's for largemouth, on average, I mean, much smaller than a lot of the country, right? Of course, where you live, or Florida, or like, you know, the South. I think on the top end of that scale, I think if you catch like a 6-pounder, you've done really well. You know, I don't even know if I've seen a picture of somebody catching a 6-pounder. I mean, I know they exist, right? Because you hear about it sometimes.
Yeah.
For a largemouth, like 6 pounds would be big. You know, my biggest is 18-inch largemouth,
Okay.
which I think was probably right around 4 pounds, something like that. And then for smallmouth, on the other hand, in the Willamette River, I think on average the size is a little bit smaller than the Columbia River. But my biggest is 20 and a half, and I think that's somewhere around 5 pounds. And our state record, you know, I have to look it up. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's bigger than that for sure. It's like in the, I want to say 7-pound range, but that just is not common. It's really not common. So I think, yeah, largemouth, you're probably in the tops at 6 pounds. Smallmouth, maybe similar, but probably more closer to 5, maybe 5.5, something like that.
No, it's not bad.
That's a big fish. I mean, if I were to catch a 6-pound largemouth, like a 20, 21, something like that, I'd be stoked.
That would be considered like a trophy bass in that
Definitely
area.
for where I'm at right now,
Yeah.
Absolutely, and I think a lot of people would consider it that. Yeah.
No, awesome. How does the transition seasons? We're actually let's break it down by seasons, because I've actually was kind of blown away with. I was talking to a coworker. She's from Seattle. Both her and husband from Seattle. They transferred to Dallas because of work. Now they retired. They moved back to Seattle. And she's been telling me you got to come over here to Seattle because they have a lake house and stocked with huge bass. Her husband sent me a picture of bass they caught recently, and I was like, that's a big bass, even for Texas size. That's a big bass. But one of the things that talking to her that I got blown away was the seasons like winter, and I didn't know this. Winter, apparently it's not as cold as people expect us Southerners. I should say Southerner by adoption, but
yeah.
That I expect, there's not that. It's not that cold. Now, how would you say that's accurate? Because I guess a lot of people from an area would consider like, oh yeah, this is gonna be like Ohio, the great tundra, Wisconsin kind of thing, the Great Lakes. Is it that cold over there in the Northwest?
So it's interesting, right? So if you look at us on a map, well, more like if you look at us on a globe and you actually look at, the longitudinal lines. So we're at the 45th parallel. The 45th parallel is about 45 minutes south of me on the freeway, right? Mm-hmm. So we're halfway between the equator and the North Pole.
Okay.
And then if you look at that same line and you trace it over, that's like equal to like Maine.
Yeah.
Basically, right? It is freezing cold up there, right? You know, all the Great Lakes, all the way into the Northeast. I mean, it gets extreme up there. If we get 6 inches of total snow in the Portland area, and that's true for Seattle too. Like pretty much we're more or less the same. I mean, not exactly, but we're more or less the same. Yeah. If we get 6 inches of total snowfall in the winter, it was a big snowfall.
Really?
Now that's not true. That's not true in the mountains and whatever, but down here in the valley. And and then if you're talking about like upstate New York or something, they're getting feet of snow, right? Yeah. And then that's true all the way into like Ohio, like you mentioned, that whole area, Great Lakes and whatnot. So no, it's way more temperate than most people think. It rains a ton in the wintertime. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. It's always friggin' wet. That's why it's so green over here. It's like rain from pretty much like it'll start raining here in a month. Halloween, it's always raining, and it'll rain till like May. And it'll just rain all the time. But it's not that cold. Our lows, they get to below freezing like, I don't know, 10 days a year, 20 days a year. Not that bad. And then when I say freezing, it's like 30 degrees. It's not even like it's not 10 or, negative degrees.
And I heard a lot of it has to do with the Pacific winds, coming from, I guess, the West Coast. And again, I'm not an expert on meteorologists, but I found that interesting. It kind of blew my mind. I always thought it was like, oh, that's going to be like, same thing as Wisconsin, same thing as Maine or upstate New York. But I found out it's not. And that's interesting. Now, going back to that, how does that affect the fishing? Because in winter, let's break it down by season. Let's start with winter. How does winter, fall it's just started. So let's start with fall. How does fall fishing for either smallmouth bass or largemouth bass works for you in that area?
You know what? Fall starts to get real tough. And for me, and the reason for that is the river, as soon as the rain, I fish the river, and it's a big old river. Don't get me wrong. I mean, when I talk river, like in say the middle of summer, there's like barely any flow in this river. I mean, like you could be on it and you don't know if it's the current moving you or the wind, right? Because there's just, it's a big river and it's just, there's not rain flow that's flooding it out. So it's a really slow moving beast. But when the rains start, there's so many tributaries that flow into our rivers, especially the Willamette. And I'm speaking mostly about the Willamette because the Columbia is all dammed up. So the Columbia, above our first dam, Bonneville Dam, which is about an hour from me, above that, it's a series of pools, right? Because there's so many hydroelectric dams, and they can maintain that water. So they, say, hey, we need more water. It's like Kentucky Lake or something, right? From what I understand, it's like it's the flow is based on how much hydroelectricity they need to generate, right? So they open up the flood, the dam, and generate more electricity that creates more flow. But on the Willamette, there's no dams, and when the rain starts, it'll blow out and it'll get moving. I mean, if you could be in the wintertime, when we have a big rain, you can be in downtown Portland and see straight up logs flowing down the river. I mean, it's just brown, it's nasty. Like you cannot be out there on a kayak after the rains start heavy. So really I feel like our fall is cut short by the rain a lot of times because that water temperature could be okay. It could be like in the 50s, but there's just so much flow that I'm not going out there on a kayak, and I don't have a boat, and I don't know anybody with a boat. So I know guys do go out there and fish it, but for a kayak fisherman, it's like, not for me. No, thanks. I'll pass, because it's like, you're going to spend all your energy trying to paddle upstream to a spot and then try to just maintain that spot. Because if you go downstream, you're not coming home.
Yeah.
So,
do you mostly do lake fishing, or I'm assuming you do river fishing mostly? Do you do lake fishing as well?
I do. And the lake, if I want to do fall fishing and winter fishing, I'll hit the lake. But the thing is, the nearest lake to me, and there's a lot of this around here too, is that the reservoirs are really deep. And you know how the bass get. And when I'm talking deep, I'm talking like 100 feet deep.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's like, they'll go out and I don't know where they go. They just like disappear because I don't feel like they're on the bottom, but they're probably out suspended somewhere in 30 feet of water, who knows, just in the middle of the lake somewhere. And it's really tough to catch them in the late fall and in the wintertime. So I'm not very successful in the winter. I know that from talking to other people, deep presentations like a deep drop shot or maybe a Ned rig, things like that, around any sort of rocky point you can find in the late fall and in the winter is good. But it's tough because the water does get cold. Like our water temps will get into the mid 40s.
Okay.
And those bass just kind of shut down, and you got to basically bump them on the nose to get a bite. So it's tough.
Okay, so kind of like fall and winter, kind of like the same thing as far as there's a lot of rain, and I guess winter gets more colder, so the fishing gets tougher for you, right?
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Is there any season that you would particularly move to say, hey, it's about the season where I'm going to focus more on largemouth bass than smallmouth bass, or vice versa? Is there any season like that you say, no, I want to focus on this bass species because of the season?
Yeah, I think it's probably around the spawn. For me, but it's tough. It's like, where do I want to go? It's thinking about just how far do I want to travel today? Because really, once we get into, say, March, and April, really, the weather, generally we get our first like 70-degree air temperature days, probably in April. And at that point, the smallmouth are spawning. But again, if the river is blown out, you can't really get on it. So I almost always miss the smallmouth spawn because the river, it's tough. Like I said, it's hard to get on the river. So then I'll, if the air temperatures are right and the water temperatures are getting up there, then I'll go hit largemouth, in like April, and I'll have a lot of good success with that, just up shallow, and a lot of the same techniques that everybody talks about. You can catch them on spinner baits up shallow. You can catch them on, simple, weedless Texas rigs, things like that. Senkos, wacky worms, whatever, that sort of thing. But one thing that I do love to do in the spring is on the Columbia River. So the Columbia has on both sides, but Washington is on the north side. So you can't, unless you buy a license, right, for Washington. But if you're an Oregonian, you can't fish that side of the river. but there's some sloughs and some backwater areas that the bass can get into, and those pools warm up way faster, and they'll come in there to spawn. And that is so much fun, man, to go out there and throw like a Ned rig out there, or even I'll catch them on a spinnerbait, because the smallmouth can be so aggressive around the spawn. You know, they're ready to eat. The water's getting warmer, and I've caught some of my best smallmouth on the Columbia River. And again, the Willamette River is difficult because it gets so blown out, but the Columbia is controlled by those dams, and so you can get in those backwater areas where there's not a ton of flow, and the water clears up quicker, and that's a lot of fun.
Oh, so what's the best season for you to do smallmouth bass in this case? Because we already talked about largemouth bass, but smallmouth bass, when do you really say, okay, I'm going to focus more on smallmouth bass?
You know, it's funny. I don't know who this quote goes to, so I can't attribute it to anybody. But at some point, somebody I read or heard or something on a video, whatever, that they were like, smallmouth go together like, or smallmouth and summer go together like PB&J, peanut butter and jelly. and it's so true. I mean, if it's, say it's July, I can catch 30, 40, 50 smallmouth in a day.
Wow.
And again, some of those are dinks. I mean, you really got to weed through the dinks. You know, if you catch 40 fish, you'll catch 20 that are 8 inches or less. You know, hey, it's a fish, right? It counts. Yeah. But, you know, and then looking for those, you'll catch 4, 5, 6 that are, you know, 15, 16, something like that, 14 inches, whatever they are. But summer, man, if you want to catch smallmouth bass, you can catch them, and they'll eat. If it's plastic, they'll eat it. Like it's like, you know, drop shot, Ned rig, Texas rig, spinnerbait too. I love throwing a spinnerbait in the summertime. They get really aggressive around the rocks. Any sort of like rock kind of outcropping.
Yeah.
Paddle tail swim baits. Yeah, anything like that. So summer definitely is the time if you really want to catch a whole bunch of smallmouth. You can catch them. I mean, anybody can. You know, you can be super novice, and that's what got me into it too. Is that, oh wow, I'm actually catching fish. You know, if I wasn't catching fish, I probably wouldn't have stuck with it. You know, but just, you know, at least you know, numbers are relatively easy to catch, so it's fun. Keeps you engaged.
Do you do any technique where you just want to like weed out not the smallmouth bass, but just the, you know, the dinks, I should say? You do any technique where you say, okay, I want to weed them out, so this is the technique, or this is the size of bait that I'm using to get to the big smallmouth bass?
Yeah, I think size is a big thing. Like if I'm throwing a swim bait, you know, I can catch a ton on a 3-inch swim bait, right? But if I make that just a little bit bigger, do like a 3.5 or a 4-inch, I'll definitely catch less fish, but on average they'll get bigger. So I do that. Another thing is going back to the spinnerbait. I love throwing spinnerbaits, and a lot of people don't, as far as I can tell. Around here, it seems like a forgotten bait in a way. I hear a lot of people talk about soft plastics almost exclusively for smallmouth around here, and there's something about the spinnerbait that just gets that bigger bite. And it's so much fun. You know, I mean, you just, you know, it's almost like a chuck and wind thing. And when I get next to some rocks, you know, if I can see a little, just even a tiny little rock point, you know, I mean, when I say tiny, I'm talking like 3 feet of a bigger rock sticking out somewhere. And I just stop it for half a second and then just keep going. They'll hit it right there. And usually bigger fish. So those are a lot of fun. You'll catch some small ones on it sometimes if they're up for it, but generally bigger ones.
I always thought, and we were talking about this with the Paddle and Fin host on our chat room in Facebook about sand bass, and it applies to smallmouth bass too. Is like one thing that I love about, again, it applies to both smallmouth bass and sand bass, is I think largemouth bass, and it depends what bait you throw. Moving bait, they're gonna hit it hard, but a largemouth bass relies a lot on that vacuum of opening their mouth and vacuuming in the bait,
right?
Whereas a sand bass, smallmouth bass, have to really rely on hitting that bait and, you know, grabbing with their mouth. And so they've hit, and that's what I love about fishing for both of them, even though, you know, in Texas, you should try to go for the largemouth bass because they're going to be a lot bigger than the smallmouth bass and obviously the sand bass. But that bite, I mean, those fish with that smaller mouth, they just hit that bait so hard that to me that's super fun to catch, and it's kind of like underrated in the sense that yeah, you're not getting that big fish that you might get with the largemouth bass, but boy oh boy, do they hit that bait hard, man.
Oh yeah.
They hit it so hard.
Oh yeah, smallmouth are on average, they hit so much harder and they fight so much harder.
Yeah.
And the thing, what I love too about the river smallmouth especially, is that they're dealing with that. They're dealing with that current. They're dealing with that like unpredictability of the water. They're dealing with that. They've got to hunt, and there's a big area to hunt, and that food it can escape, right? Like it's dealing with the same environment. It's got the current. It can get away. And so those smallmouth, they're just so much more aggressive, I feel like, on average than the largemouths. Don't get me wrong, I want to catch a 20-inch largemouth. I'm hunting for it. But that 20-inch smallmouth just doubles over your rod and just, peels out drag, and it's a 5-minute fight, as opposed to 2-minute fight or whatever. I love
no, and I would figure,
smallmouth.
and I'm not a big river expert on this, but we do have river fishing here, but it's not as big as lake fishing over here. But I would assume, and this is just me, kind of like what makes sense in my mind. I can be completely wrong. I'm not a biologist, marine biologist, or bass biologist by no means. But a fish that's constantly to survive has to fight with current. Yeah. Is going to build that muscle mass more than a fish that can just leisurely just stay in one place on a lake and not have to worry pretty much little to no current at all. Whereas fish, that either they may be smaller because of the complexities of living in a river, but I would think they tend to be, and I've heard they tend to be stronger and more muscle because, again, they have to keep moving for a living,
I mean, it seems like that to me. Yeah. I mean, that's, that's a logical thing to think. And it seems that way. It's like, I was out on the river a couple weeks ago, and I saw this explosion, right? This topwater explosion, a couple 100 yards away, and I thought, man, I better go down there and paddle and throw something down in there. And I got down there, and it happened again, and so I threw in a swim bait, it was like a 3-inch swim bait, and yeah, sure enough, started catching a couple. Well, what I realized though, a little while later, when I saw a blow up right next to my kayak, like 5 feet away, they were chasing individual little, probably, I don't know, maybe they were like salmonoids or some kind of little, maybe a little trout or a little salmon, smolt, something, but they were like 3 inches long, same size as my swim bait. But I guess the point I'm making is like, it wasn't a school of fish, but these smallmouth were chasing down individual fish, going crazy and just trying to get this, I'm going to get that one guy, right? Where it seems like, it would be more productive for them to chase down a whole school and just swim through it and get a couple. But they were just being so aggressive trying to get one fish at a time. And that's what they do out here. They just, they're nuts. They're serial killers.
They're fun to catch, I'm sure. So I know that Great Northwest, you get a lot of salmon, steelhead, and all that. And that's pretty much the fishing culture over there. Now, the bass culture has grown. How have you seen the bass fishing culture, I should say, grown in the last, since you started, whatever amount of years since you started? How do you see it? Is it growing? Are you more like, do people go like, you do bass fishing over there? Or like, are they like, or is it growing? You feel like you're the kind of the exception to the rule, or is there really bass anglers out there?
There are bass anglers out here. I mean, we have, I don't do the tournament scene at all, but we do have a small, a bass fishing tournament circuit out here. And it probably has grown. There's probably more people just like me who didn't know it was a thing, and now they know it's a thing. And I do see more people out on kayaks, which almost surely are bass fishing, because I mean, they're crazy out here. They'll fish for sturgeon, they'll fish for salmon, they'll fish for big old fish on kayaks. They're crazy. But I do see more kayaks out, and they're probably fishing for bass. But I don't think it's really grown all that much. I think it's still a forgotten thing. Like people, there's a really big sort of, argument, if you will, against like, the bass fish are invasive and they're taking over the water of these like cold water, salmon and steelhead, and eating up all their, their fry and whatever. And maybe that's true. I'm not here to dispute that, but there's way more cold water anglers that are out fishing for steelhead, salmon, trout, and that those species than there are bass. But hey man, they can leave them all to us, because I'm having a ball, man. I'm having a ball, and so, and that's the other thing too, is like, you're fishing for salmon. A good season, you go out and catch like 2 or 3, right, or whatever, and sure, you take them home, you eat them, they're delicious. I'm not bad mouthing that, but like, shoot, I can go out and catch 30 bass in a day and have a great day. I'm not just, waiting for something to bite. I'm out actively fishing for it.
Yeah.
And there's just way more fish to catch, and they're super accessible. One thing though, to go back to your question a little bit, is I have noticed in a couple of the local tackle stores that there's a bit more tackle every year, a bit more plastics, a bit more like jig heads, a bit more, spinner baits and stuff. And the local Cabela's too. There's still a big majority of them is cold water stuff. But once Bass Pro Shops bought Cabela's, I noticed that there was more bass gear as well. So and maybe that's just the takeover there. But I want to believe that somebody realized, hey, there's a lot of guys in here looking for bass gear. Maybe we should, increase our thing by 10%, 20%, whatever. Yeah. So in general though, people aren't fishing for bass gear, just in general, right? But those of us who are super into it, and it's a lot of fun, and it's not going away for sure. So,
nice. Do you now? You say you don't really do tournaments, but do you part of like a club or community out there that do bass fishing? Or just go and by yourself?
Yeah, I just pretty much do it by myself. I have a couple people who I go out with, occasionally. I went out with a guy yesterday. We went out to the Columbia River, and I just I don't know. I'm a pretty quiet guy in general, and just doing my own thing, man. And I post on social media sometimes, and I do go to an online forum. We've got the Oregon Fishing Forum that I go to sometimes and talk to people on. But in general, I'm just out for the rest and relaxation, and that feeling, man, that tight line.
Yeah, definitely. So, man, I hope it grows, but doesn't grow too much where it's gonna have to deal with fighting for your spots out there. But the growth is always good. You get more, like you're gonna say, the demand for bass fishing. Creates competitive and brands and stuff like that. So it's always good to grow. But yeah, there could be a thing as too much people. I don't see that happening in the Great Northwest, again, with all the we said the salmon, steelhead, and the culture it is. But it is nice, and I'm glad you kind of opened my eyes to bass fishing the Great Northwest. I definitely want to go check out Portland and do some bass fishing over there. So maybe I'll hit you up, and you can you can be my tour guide. Take me some of those spots, man.
I'd love that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So, Luke, thank you so much for joining. I know you're not a big social media guy. Is there anything left that you want us to, before we wrap it up, that we're missing? That any questions that I should have asked that I haven't asked about bass fishing, whether it's smallmouth or largemouth bass in the Great Northwest?
Oh man, I don't know. I could talk all day. I love it. So yeah, any about it, I'm happy to oblige. And no, I couldn't name anything you've missed. There's plenty more to talk about, I'm sure.
Anytime, yeah, you can talk about bass fishing. That's why I have an episode, because I can do it every week. Sure. But also, man, Luke, thank you so much. Before I let you go, man, anybody, like I said, I know you don't do the whole social media thing that much and all that, but is there any local shops you want to thank? Anybody that you want to thank for influencing you in bass fishing? Go ahead.
Well, I'm not on social media all that much. I do have Instagram. I'm on there. It's Luke_Johnston_PNW for Pacific Northwest. You can hit me up on there. I probably start posting on there more. I just, I neglect it. But yeah, you can hit me if you want to get in touch. And that's the other thing too is, man, I'm definitely interested in meeting up with more people and going out fishing with people. So if you're in the area and you want to go out, catch some bass, totally into it. So you can hit me up on there. Man, and then you know what? Like my wife puts up with a lot.
Don't with them all.
Yeah, man, they all do, right? But no, man, it's a thing where it's like I literally go out on an entire weekend day every weekend, almost without question. It's like we, I plan around it, and she lets that happen for me. She says like, you're a lion. If I don't let you out, you're gonna rip apart the cage. So she gives me a long leash to go out and explore and go on camping trips and just all that. So I appreciate that. So yeah,
awesome. Gotta thank the ladies for that, man. So Luke, thank you.
And one other thing, man, I want to say is like the whole Paddle and Fin podcast as well, man. That is so cool, and I want to thank everybody who does that. I listen to every single one of them, like without question. I mean, I can't listen to yours in Spanish, the one you do. I think that's super cool too. I mean, I guess I can listen to it, right?
If you want to learn Spanish,
but no, I listen to all of it. And I'm super into it, and I learn a ton from it, from all the different guests, everything about it. So I appreciate you guys doing that, and I hope you all keep it up because it's super cool.
Yeah, we have a great family at Paddle and Fin. It's like family. We have our differences, and it doesn't always go smoothly. But I mean, we respect and we love each other as a family in Paddle and Fin, and it's great to be part of the Paddle and Fin family. I've been here for now a few months now, thanks to Brian Schiller, who's pretty much the founder of Paddle and Fin. So he doesn't like to be called the big boss, but I always, just to tease him, I call him, shout out to the big boss, Brian Schiller. But yeah, man, thank you for that. I appreciate it. We're not looking to get monetized. If it happens, it happens. But we're more trying to grow, the kayak fishing community. Each of us have our own sponsors, and some of us may get revenue out of it or not. Some of them just discounts. But the main thing is just help the kayak fishing community grow organically and responsibly, and that's the most important thing. And keep the drama out of it. And to me, kayak fishing has always been about getting away. For me, getting away from the hecticness of life. So that's what I want to bring to the podcast. Of course, there's situations like what Oregonians and Pacific Northwest is going through, the fire. So that needs to be mentioned and addressed, of course. And again, thoughts and prayers to everybody out there that is struggling through that. I know things are almost done with the wildfires, not completely, right? But hopefully things will get better, especially when the rainy season comes now.
Yeah, no, thank you again for that, because you're right. They're coming to an end now. It's getting hot again, so things could pick back up. But I don't think this is the end of the season in general, and so we should be pretty much out of the woods. But man, like down south, California too, it gets a lot hotter down there. They get a lot less rain. There's a lot of people down there that are still in serious a serious situation just as the season goes on, because their fall down near LA, pretty much they don't even have a fall, so it could be fire season into November for all we know. So but yeah, no, I appreciate that, and like I said, we're doing well, and
that's
wish everybody around here thoughts and prayers for sure.
Definitely. So for those out there listening, again, thank you to Luke Johnston for joining us. If you made it this far into the podcast, we appreciate it. Remember, this segment is brought to you by Douglas Rods. So check us out at douglasoutdoors.com. Again, they're now in Tackle Warehouse, the biggest probably online commercial for tackle and fishing gear. So that's pretty cool. So thank you again, Luke. Have a good night, man. And to all of you out there, stay safe. You're going to be on the water. Wear your PFDs. Take the necessary precautions to be safe. And guidelines, y'all.